Welcome to our next lecture in BAAS 3020 Fundamentals of Inquiry and Discovery. This is on Module 5 and is talking about background information for your research inquiry. Again, I'm Professor Michael Bailey. This is a fun picture I wanted to share with you guys. This is me in the summer of 2019. I used to work, as I believe I've told most of you, that I lived and worked in Munich, Germany, and my best buddy in the world, Oliver, has a wife who is Italian, Sicilian, and I've spent a couple summers with them vacationing in Sicily and have been adopted by this family. And so this is a picture of me in Florence, Italy. I wanted to surprise the family by learning some Italian, and I spent a month in Florence before I went and spent the vacation with them. And this is me standing at the door of Galileo's house, where he was imprisoned after, the church imprisoned him for saying that the world did not resolve, that the earth revolved around the sun instead of everything revolving around us, which was controversial with the church for some strange reason. Anyway, let me move on, not digress. In Module 5, here's kind of the overview of Module 5. We are looking at the text 100 questions about survey research and looking at the questions number 43 through 50. We are looking at the text 52 things. We're going to be looking at things numbered 6 through 10 and 12 through 17. And then in Canvas, you'll find research materials, specifically a glossary on background research, a whole page of information, which looks overwhelming, but it's really short. It's probably a 10 or 15-minute read, the review of background literature, and some good stuff there. And then the additional materials, again, although again I've got 4 listed, they're all short videos or resources. So the purpose of literature review video, types of sources, which is a link, which is another video, very short, like 3 minutes, that helps you identify the right source for the right need. A link to the UNT resource about what sources are available to you as a student. And then once you've kind of picked a resource, evaluating that resource using the CRAP test, and CRAP is an acronym. The assignments for this module are, again, a learning module quiz on all the materials you see here. And then, of course, this is to begin your discussion number 2. Okay. Our reading from 100 questions is on questions number 43 through 50, which make up part 5 of our text, establishing the reliability and validity of survey questions. 43 is, how do we ensure survey questions measure what they're supposed to? And what we're talking about here is how to evaluate the validity of the questions and the reliability. And by validity, does the survey question accurately and precisely measure the concept of interest? And reliability gets at how consistently a survey question produces the same results over and over again. If a survey question does not validly or reliably measure the concept of interest, then the concept is measured with error. Now, measurement errors is unavoidable. They'll always be there, but we can try to minimize it. How is content validity established? Content validity is ensuring that a concept is comprehensively measured with the survey questions chosen to represent the construct. If it's measured completely, then we say we have high content validity. Okay, you do this by starting with a deep reading of all existing research, and specifically looking at the measures or survey questions used by other researchers. What you want to do is make sure you understand all aspects of the concept, and then your survey questions should be developed to measure all those aspects. If there aren't prior research and you have to develop your own questions, it's helpful to request assistance from experts in the concept to look over your questions. Number 45, what is criterion validity? Criterion validity assesses the accuracy of our survey questions to some established independent instrument that measures the same underlying concept. If the two correlate highly, then we have validated our question. So the example they give is maybe your survey is trying to measure how well, or to predict how well someone will do in college. And so the criterion they use was the SAT scores. And this is an example of predictive criterion validity, because the idea here is if they do well on the SAT, they'll do well in college, etc. Criteria can also be, besides being predictive, it can be contemporaneous or concurrent. Now, criteria has to be chosen carefully, and it needs to be representative of the concept or phenomenon under consideration. It's very difficult in a lot of social service or social science surveys to find a criterion because they just don't exist, or the concept is just too abstract. Number 46, what is construct validity? Construct validity is another way to determine how accurately our survey question measures the concept. To ascertain construct validity, we look to the theory to tell us how our concept ought to be associated with other concepts. And here we want to demonstrate both convergent and discriminant forms of construct validity. Convergent validity is similar to the idea of criterion validity, concurrent criterion validity, in that it assesses the association between survey questions that roughly measure the same concept. Okay, so if the theory, you have a concept in your survey, there's a theory about a similar concept, you want to see how well they're related. Now, if there's a high correlation, either positive or negative. Now, what that means is that your survey question is very similar to the responses in the theoretical concept, then there's a high correlation. It can also be the exact opposite, that there can be correlation, negative correlation, which means that there's, one goes up and one goes down. They go the opposite directions, as we saw in a previous module. Discriminant validity returns to the theory and asks what concepts are not associated with our concept of interest. In other words, rather than looking to what other concepts theoretically it should be related to, we also look to what it shouldn't be related to. Number 47, what is measurement reliability and how is it established? Measurement reliability is defined just simply as the consistency in responses to survey questions, so that if people take the same survey, you get roughly the same kind of measures over time. There's several different types of reliability measured. There's the test retest, making sure that you don't test people too quickly, because then they're memorizing their answers. There's a split halves method, which is to treat survey questions as if they were on alternative forms, kind of like the odds and the evens. You might see how people score on the odds questions and then on the evens, but it's very difficult sometimes to split them. And then the internal consistency method is the most commonly used method. And this is based on average correlation and the number of items used. 48, what is measurement error? Measurement error is defined as the difference between a participant's true answer to a survey question and the answer they actually give. Now, this is different than standard deviation, which is looking at how multiple responses, differ from the average, etc. A difference can happen because the question fails to measure the concept well, and this is called a random error, or it's based in some way, perhaps through using leading language, and this is a systematic error. Okay. Random errors can go either way. People can underreport, they can overreport. You could have some people underreport because they didn't understand the question. You could have some overreport, it could net out to zero. So there's a lot of things that can happen with random error. Systematic errors, typically, especially if it's leading language, tend to all go in one direction because you're leading people to answer a specific way. Questionnaire bias and interview bias can also lead to systematic measurement bias. If the question is too long, if it's not well organized, it's too confusing or too cluttered, there can be different differences in the way people respond to what they actually mean. Also, depending upon who the interviewer is, even the physical characteristics, the ethnicity, the language, etc., can also create errors in the way people will respond to questions. How can measurement error be minimized? There will always be some random measurement error that is unavoidable. There should never be systematic measurement error in the study because that will make it a flawed study. The best way to minimize measurement error is to devote considerable time and attention to the design of your survey questions, and there's several examples in here about what you need to do. These are very specific to the content of the question, but they're also specific to the communication strategy, the format, how your survey looks. They talk about leaving lots of white space so it doesn't look really crowded, like there's tons of questions, etc. So it's not just content, but it's also format, if you will. How can pre-testing and pilot testing improve reliability and validity? Pre-testing is having a group of experts take the survey and then using a Likert scale describe whether they think that the question fits the concept well. A pilot test, sometimes called a feasibility study, is actually a rehearsal of the entire study from administration to data entry and analysis. And both of these can provide key insight into your survey, your questions, etc. So our next reading is from 52 Things About Customer Analytics. These are really good too, that should hopefully not only influence your survey project, but also give you some real insight into how the learning from this course about creating surveys can really apply to your work in a company or organization. Almost every company does some sort of survey, whether you work on internal processes like HR, or if you work on external interfaces like marketing. So understanding your customer and how to ask questions and the right way to do it and analyzing data can be very important. So let's look at some of these. And first we're looking at section 2, which talks about picking the right, not the easy metric. And you can think of each of your question as a metric. What are you asking? What are you trying to measure? So number 6 is to vaguely right or precisely wrong. And the subtitle is Measure What Matters, Not What's Easy to Report. And so here they use a great example about advertising and how they used to look at recall versus purchasing, really. Like, you know, whether someone remembers a commercial well or not doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to purchase the product. So the important thing here is to search for measures that link to your impact, that link specifically to the objective that you're after. If you're trying to sell something, how do you figure out if someone's going to buy something? Okay. Number 7, statistical significance versus BS. And that's not what you're thinking of BS, it's business significance. Okay. Statistical analysis and significance addresses the variability caused by using a sample. Do most people buy it? Is it consistently choose this, whatever? But business significance tells us if the difference matters. So statistical significance tells us, you know, how many people choose A over B. But business significance suggests that tells us if that difference matters. Does the difference cause you to reach a different business decision? Statistical significance is still relevant. You're still going to do statistical analysis. But again, what you're really trying to focus on is what is the objective of your survey or analysis, and how does it relate to important measures inside your company, important actions, etc. The wrong metric. Select an evaluation metric that aligns with the business objective. Avoid picking a metric because it is familiar. This could lead to the wrong decision. So when you're doing analysis, you have to ask 2 questions. What are we trying to achieve? What is the business objective? And how do we know that we've met that? What is the action or deliverable that lets us know that we've done that? They go through a lot of different examples here. And I love this text because it does give really simple answers about predictability and analytics and analysis. So they give some good examples in that chapter as well. Interest is not enough. Interest can differ substantially from actions, so beware of placing too much value on search metrics. Instead, try to get access to actual purchase or usage data. And they do some interesting things comparing how, and when they're talking about search data, they've even used kind of the modern search data, which is about using Google, etc. And they talk about the difference between Google and Amazon, how Google knows where you go, but they don't know what you've done. Whereas Amazon not only knows what you've looked at, they know ultimately what you've decided. So maybe you looked at 3 different types of ketchup, but you bought ketchup A. And so they can make some decisions about what they're going to do the next time you show up. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It is best practice to have a control. One all too common example of bad practice is to forgo having one. Remember, the control group is the group that doesn't get the treatment that you're doing for other folks. When conducting testing, you need the ability to measure the impact. In most cases, this requires a control group. And so they go through the importance of having that control group when it can create some problems if you don't have it, and the insight it brings. And I like the quote that they used at the end by former President Ronald Reagan, who said, "Trust but verify." And the idea here was that you trust the data, but then you verify it. And the way you can verify your analysis and your instrument is having a control group, etc., that is not party of that. Okay. Section 3 was about collecting data. You can't always get what you want. And it also talks about, they use the expression GIGO, G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't ask the right questions, you're getting garbage in, and then your analysis based on that is going to be garbage out. Okay? Chapter 12, why didn't you ask me that? Respondents can't answer a question you don't ask. Use qualitative research to identify the right questions. This is a great one and something you should really pay attention to when you're designing your own survey. This can be a great help to make sure that you have the right questions. Qualitative research, such as focus groups led by a moderator, can help you figure out if you've asked the right questions. So when you're asking kind of generic questions about it, they can kind of help you target in. They said asking participants to complain about a product or service and they will outperform, rather than simply asking them what they want in a product or what's important to them. And they even give this little suggested, first you have a group whine or complain about a list of problems, then you have them rank those problems from high to low in terms of severity and frequency, and then you have them group them in themes based upon where they fall on some kind of chart. Remember to use qualitative research to identify the right questions to ask. Remember, respondents can't answer a question you don't ask. Ask the right question. Stop boiling the ocean and take time to identify the right questions. Asking a few exacting questions creates shorter, more enjoyable surveys that respondents engage with, making your analysis easier and clearer. Surveys are often too long, leading to respondent boredom and likely lack of focus on the questions. And so really trying to, this all ties together. Hopefully you're seeing that. If you know what the business objective is, you may have done number 12, doing some research, some qualitative research. Asking a few questions that are right on target is much better than asking 100 questions. That's going to make your analysis more difficult to figure out the relationships, etc. Okay? I won't answer that. Maybe. Knowing what information you need does not make it easy to acquire when data is hard to collect. Be creative in how you get it. And so they have some great examples here. They talked about a dating site that asked questions about interracial dating in 3 different ways, and some questions that people were much more likely to respond to than others, even though they were giving this kind of the same information. And so they talk about if collecting the data is difficult, if people either don't want to give it or are confused about the data, what you can do is to reframe the question, remove barriers to providing data, or put yourself in their shoes. And again, they've given some great examples in this chapter. Choice matters. And when we say choice matters, it's what people actually do, okay? And the idea, this is a great chapter. I love this. What we say is important and what we choose can be different. So you might ask a question about what's really important to you in choosing a vacation. But then, if you ask, you give several options that are similar to those same attributes, you ask them to pick and ask them to pick which vacation they want to pick. Often people will pick something totally different. So don't ask people what is important. Instead, ask them to choose. If you want predictive results, don't ask people what's important. Ask them to make a choice. A meal by any other name. Words matter. We need to make sure to ask well-worded questions and be careful that labels don't intentionally constrain our thinking. Here they use a lot of examples that are international examples where they've framed a question that meant something different in a different culture and country. But here they're really just talking about being careful how you word the question. Of course, you want to look for bias. We've talked about that before. But here, the way that you word it may influence people's thinking. And so I'm being careful about that. This, again, you can go back to number 12 and think about doing some focus group type stuff. And yes, you can do that even in your teams or individually by, instead of a focus group, maybe just interviewing a couple people about the topic or the concept that you're doing. This will not only give you ideas of areas of questions, but also maybe help you with the wording of some of these as well. This gives a great example in number 16 about how the company Instagram was formed by the guy that started the company. As phones became stronger and stronger and smarter and smarter and better cameras, most people just thought of the camera as a feature on their phone. And supposedly the Instagram founder thought, wow, I now have a camera that has a network. And that created the idea that he needed some place to be able to share pictures across. Okay. And our last one, do not forget to look in the rear view mirror. So this is talking about when you're doing your research, you really want to compare, look at previous research that's been done, previous questions, previous trends, etc. And it's talking about making sure that your survey, if it's along a similar concept, isn't done so fundamentally different, because you also want to be able to compare your results. And if you make totally different types of analysis or totally different types of survey, it's going to be hard for you to use existing and historical data. Okay. So we've been at this a bit of a while, and I don't like how long this video is becoming. So I suggest you hit pause and just get up and stretch, go get a coffee, walk outside, take a break, whatever you need to do, a bathroom break, and then come back. And I recommend you do this anyway whenever you need to. That's the benefit of having videos. And when you come back and hit play again, you'll see a great poem, and which I think is another kind of pause or a different kind of break for your brain. So you might ask, why do I put a poem in the middle of this as a pause? And I believe that most of us are used to reading prose, paragraphs, sentences, emails, etc. And poetry, by the format, by the methodology, touches a different part of our brain. It isn't always quite so literal like a story or like a pathway. Sometimes you have to, all the stones aren't there, all the stepping stones aren't there, and you have to take a leap. And so I just think it kind of is a shower for our brain, if you will. And this poem I really like. Mary Oliver was the poet laureate for the United States for quite a while. And she uses a lot of nature images. She has another poem called The Journey, which I highly recommend. But this one, to me, speaks about how we can get caught up in not knowing our place in things. And yet, perhaps if we slow down, walk out into the world, that place is always there welcoming us back. So here is actually Mary Oliver reading her poem.
Wild geese You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Our next resource for learning materials is simply another glossary with terms and definition and examples for background research. Our next resource for this week's learning is a review of background literature and writing. And when you open this page, don't get overwhelmed if you page down and it looks like a lot. The first thing is a What is Literature Review video by Dean of BAAS at UNT, Dr. Margaret Peggy Shattuck. And it's an interesting and very short video that kind of gives you a good overview. And then we have a lot of content. It looks like a lot of content, but it really isn't. There's a lot of different sections. Most of these are brief paragraphs or even bulleted sections. What is the definition of background literature? What's the purpose? Why do we do this research? What to include? Searching using databases. Start broad and narrow down. These are all great things that you need in going through your survey project, specifically when you're doing the background research. Start broad and narrow down, the quality of sources, abstracts, some writing tips, then talks about citation and plagiarism. Literally, although you might look at this and go, oh my God, there's so much here. It's about a 10-15 minute read, and that probably actually includes the videos. And then do not miss the last video. It's an interview with Dr. Cooley, and it's about how he uses research in his job. And so I think it's a real pragmatic and practical demonstration of how you might use this in the workplace. Again, it's a very short video. I think it's 3 or 4 minutes long. So again, while there's lots of topics here, each of the pieces, and you can kind of see that even in the little graphic down to the right, they're a paragraph or so, if that. The final materials in Module 5 in the additional materials section are pretty brief, but they are also pretty powerful. The first is a very short 3-minute video on the purpose of literature review. And this does a great job of explaining these 6 different reasons why we do literature review, but more importantly in my mind, it gives you the critical reasons behind why we do it. And this is important to you as you're doing your survey, so you go, oh, okay, that's why I'm doing this piece, instead of the teachers asking me to do it. So pay attention to this. It's very short, it's very fast, but there's some great stuff in there about why you want to do these 6 different areas of literature review. Then there's another short video on the types of sources and how do you find the right source for the question or the information you're seeking. There's a link to the UNT library that shows all the sources of information that are provided for you as a student at the university. And then there's a real short 2-minute video about evaluating your resources. And CRAC stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So you can evaluate your sources. And it's a really simple acronym to learn and a way to really, again, evaluate your sources and can be very helpful in this process.